All right, this is my week 7 check-in for The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. This week is all about recovering a sense of connection, and that isn't connection to external people or communities, but a connection to your internal sense of self, your inner dialogue, your feelings and thoughts. She writes, we turn this week to the practice of right attitudes for creativity. The emphasis is on your receptive as well as active skills. The essays, exercises, and tasks aim at excavating areas of genuine creative interest as you connect with your personal dreams. The essay goes through listening, which is, obviously listening to yourself. Perfectionism is a really important topic. I think that that's actually something that a lot of creative people struggle with. And it is often the idea that you can't get started because you don't think that you'll be able to execute it perfectly or even up to a standard that you think that it should be at. But quite often, perfectionism can stop you from creating something that's really authentic. And then there's risks, I guess maybe talking about fear a little bit, but jealousy was the big one. And there is an exercise called the jealousy map where you're writing out people that you're jealous of and why you're jealous of them and what you can do to get past that jealousy. So there is actually some very good exercises. The tasks also were really good. I would say out of all of the weeks that I've done, this is my favorite series of tasks. There's something about creating some nice smell in your house, and so I ended up burning some incense. And another one about buying something nice for yourself. I bought a new pair of socks, and actually just the sensation of sitting down with a new pair of socks is somehow a form of indulgence that I don't think I get to experience very much. There's a collaging exercise, and then another one about listing 5 of your favorite films, and then trying to see if there's any common themes amongst them. I didn't actually really find any common themes among my favorite films except for being on the verge of something. So my 5 favorite films that I wrote is Pulp Fiction, Fight Club, Royal Tenenbaums, Death Becomes Her, and Spirited Away. I don't necessarily think that those films really have any themes in common, but I figured it was something about being on the edge of something or being on the verge of something. It was fun to think about, but honestly, I've been watching a lot of video check-ins of people who have done the artist way, listening to their struggles and the ups and downs, and it seems like there are a lot of patterns that people go through, a lot of difficulties that pop up on certain weeks. I did notice also that in Dochi's video check-in, she had a really difficult week in week 6, but then a really great week in week 7, and then followed by her week 8 ended up being this weird, difficult moment for her that she couldn't quite figure out. For me, week 5 was the difficult one, week 6 was the kind of breakthrough moment, and now week 7, I had the weird week. And it was weird because, so trigger warning, I probably should say, maybe skip the next 30 seconds or something if you're triggered by physical violence, but I was on a train on Tuesday and someone in the carriage stabbed another person in the carriage, and the entire train was turned into a crime scene. I ended up in this very weird fight or flight scenario, very hyper aroused, heartbeat racing, and thoughts going through my head. It was really, I wouldn't say necessarily that it was traumatic, but I definitely felt agitated and ill at ease after that. And then after that, my morning pages changed. I actually completed the morning pages all 7 days this week, but for some reason it doesn't feel like much of an achievement. And I guess that could be because, week 6 was so productive, and then this week 7, wasn't, at least not really. But my morning pages changed after that event, and they became a lot more introspective. And I guess because this week is talking about recovering a sense of connection, maybe it had something to do with that as well. But I started talking about patterns in my life, patterns of behavior, emotions, and thoughts, and actually more specifically, loops. And I do get stuck in loops. Loops are, in my mind, something that keeps you fixed in place. And it could be a thought pattern or a behavior pattern, or something that I guess seems paradoxical or ironic. I guess I can think of an example, but there's this saying in English: "It'll happen when you least expect it," which is paradoxical because if you're trying not to expect the thing in order to receive it, then that creates a completely new expectation. And maybe that's the point of the saying, like the paradox of expectation or desire. Um, in Buddhism, there's this other paradox that they have where, in order to reach enlightenment, you have to free yourself of all worldly desire. But the desire to free yourself of worldly desire is in itself a desire that you then need to free yourself from. I've actually recorded this video a million times, and I wasn't really sure if I was going to talk through the exact patterns that I have, but previously I think I'd talked about a loop that I get stuck in where I try to make changes in my life, and for some reason, if the changes are too big, my subconscious will rebel, and then I'll completely throw everything out and end up back at square one. And so that's just like, a cycle that I personally get stuck in. Another one that I get stuck in is wanting to free myself from expectation and ambition, because those things, like, you're coming from a place of lack because you haven't achieved much, and you haven't, you know, you haven't reached those ambitions. And I have this fantasy that emerges that I'll be able to free myself from all of these things, and then from that place of freedom, I'll be able to start creating authentically. And once I'm in that state of freeing myself from expectations, and freeing myself from having to produce anything, and freeing myself from, the idea that I need to be anything or become anyone, then I'll somehow become productive and then create things that will garner me the recognition and achievement that I craved in the first place. Which is kind of a tricky one, because I think still the desire and still the expectation, in a roundabout way, enters into the loop. And I struggled with this because morning page after morning page this week, I ended up talking through and identifying these loops. And that, to me, is my recovering a sense of connection, is like realizing that I get stuck in these loops very often. But I couldn't find a solution. Like, it was really tough researching this online because I don't think it's very clear exactly what it is. Alan Watts has this thing called the reverse law or something like that. And then, there's the Buddhist principles of, paradox of desire, I guess. But that's maybe the only thing that it could be, that these like paradoxical loops. And they've kept me stuck in place. And there's not really a clear solution, but Buddhism has one, or I think it's specifically Zen Buddhism, where you just become a detached observer. So I would observe myself wanting to change my behavior. And rather than actively changing the behavior and going through that whole process loop of trying to make the change and then failing and then falling back into the old pattern and trying to change it again and doing that whole thing, I would then just observe the fact that I want to change, and not make any changes, but just notice that it's there. And I guess the other one would be just noticing that I have this desire for achievement and, you know, making my way in the art world. And rather than trying to free myself of that desire or free myself from ambition and expectation, I would just notice that the desire exists and do nothing with it. Allow it to pass through you. So at the end of this week, after really struggling, I guess, with this event on the train, and also feeling somehow that I guess there's a lot of underlying cycles and patterns that are emerging, that I might try a little bit harder to integrate some level of spiritual practice. And maybe, Julia Cameron talks a lot about God and, higher power and spirituality and that kind of thing. But I think that there is something about these spiritual traditions and the wisdom that they teach that I definitely could be working harder to integrate. And definitely this idea about just observing my feelings and not necessarily doing with them, paying attention to them. I think I talked about that last week, that my experience with the artist's way has been a lot about just paying attention to things. And just through paying attention alone, things seem to start improving. My time management has gotten better. My finances have improved, all because of the exercises and tasks in the artist way that are just asking me to pay attention to those things. So I'm going to start paying attention to these loops that I get stuck in, and keep writing them in my morning pages, I guess, because they just keep emerging. And not necessarily try to make any changes, but just allow them to flow through me. That is my solution, and I guess in the coming weeks I might give it a go and see how it works. And anyway, that's my check-in for this week. Thank you.